When my father called me his secretary in front of his old Navy friends, I felt the same sting I'd carried since childhood, the quiet, sharp kind that doesn't fade. He laughed, they laughed, and I smiled like I always did, pretending it didn't matter. But then his friend's eyes caught the small black ink on my wrist. Unit 77. The laughter stopped, his smile faltered, and in that silence, I realized it wasn't humiliation anymore. It was the beginning of reckoning. My name is Rowan Pierce, and that night was the first time my father almost saw who I really was, the daughter he'd spent his whole life underestimating. Charleston, South Carolina. The air that morning carried the sharp chill of November, mixed with the smell of smoke and salt from the nearby harbor. Sunlight threaded through the Spanish moss that hung from the oaks, dappling across the yard where laughter spilled like beer foam, the sound of bottles clinking, men boasting about battles fought decades ago, and the slow sizzle of meat on the grill painted a picture that hadn't changed in years. The only difference was that I no longer fit inside it. I moved quietly between the picnic tables, nodding where I needed to, smiling where it was expected. The same faces, the same stories, the same jokes. Only now, I was the punchline. My father stood in the middle of it all, Captain Douglas Pierce, once commander of the USS Bedford, always commanding something. His presence filled every space, even without a uniform. He wore authority like a second skin. His laugh was big, his voice bigger. He lifted his glass high, sunlight flashing off the rim. "This is my daughter, Rowan. She works over at the Department of Defense. Best secretary they've got. Probably knows her way around a coffee machine better than any of us." The men roared with laughter, the kind that echoed long after it should have died. I smiled, the same tight, polite smile I'd perfected over the years. It wasn't the first time I'd been reduced to a decoration in his stories. I'd learned that silence kept peace better than honesty ever could. I raised my water glass in mock salute, the condensation cool against my fingers. Around me, the laughter grew louder, feeding on itself. Somewhere behind it, I could still hear the faint hum of engines in my memory, the rhythm of command that didn't need to shout to be heard. Only one man didn't join in. Across the crowd stood Commander Ray Dalton, silver-haired, posture straight despite his years. His eyes met mine, steady, assessing, sharp. As I shifted my hand, the sleeve of my shirt caught the light, and for a brief second, the small black ink on my wrist was exposed. Unit 77. The air between us changed. His gaze flicked down, recognition flashing before he hid it behind a neutral expression. He set his beer on the table, walked past me, and murmured low enough for only me to catch it. "Nice ink. It's not decorative." The words slipped between the noise like a secret code. He didn't smile, didn't ask more. He simply nodded once before moving on, leaving me in the swirl of laughter and smoke. But that single exchange cracked the moment open. Someone in that yard had seen me, not as an extension of my father's legend, but as my own person. My father carried on, oblivious. He told another story about the Navy, about storms and victory, his voice booming over the speakers. Each sentence was a monument to the man he used to be, polished and retold so often it no longer needed truth to stand. I stayed where I was, listening to the crowd cheer for the past, while I thought of everything I could never say about the present, about missions with no names, teams with no faces, victories that would never make headlines. When the last toast was made, I slipped away from the circle of men. The sky had turned from gold to gray, the fire in the grill fading to embers. I set my empty glass down on the wooden table with careful precision, the same precision that guided every decision I'd ever made in silence. Behind me, my father's voice rang out, full of warmth that had never learned gentleness. "You should smile more, Rowan. Life's too short." I paused for a heartbeat, letting the words hang in the cold air. Then I walked toward the gate, the crunch of gravel under my shoes the only sound I allowed myself. If he'd looked closer, he might have seen it. The way my shoulders straightened, the way my head stayed high. He might have realized that my silence wasn't surrender, it was command, but he didn't. And I didn't turn back, because he would never understand that some of us don't need to raise our voices to be heard. Some of us have learned that the heaviest truths live in silence. In Washington, when the command room door sealed behind me, the noise of the world outside disappeared. Inside, the air hummed with low static and the faint tapping of keyboards, screens glowing an electric blue across focused faces. Every decision here felt like a weight in my chest. I leaned toward the mic, voice level, clipped, measured. Deploy extraction team. Confirm evac point Bravo. Secure route Delta. The words rolled off my tongue, precise as coordinates. One misstep, one delay, and people would die. Out there, a wrong call drew blood. In here, silence was the only way to survive it. No one in this room knew that only a few hours ago. I'd stood in my father's backyard in Charleston, pretending not to hear men laughing about his secretary daughter. None of them knew I'd smiled through it. None of them knew I'd flown back that night to this, my other life, where entire operations hinged on my voice. I lived in two realities that could never touch. In one, I was Captain Pierce's quiet daughter, expected to stay small and polite. In the other, I was the unseen hand moving satellites, agents, and soldiers across the world. The Pentagon waited for my word, but my father never would. Between those two worlds lay a fragile truce, held together by a promise he once made when I was still a child, that when I became someone worth being proud of, he'd tell me. He never did. My mother used to soften the edges, her voice always gentle. "You know your father's proud in his own way," she'd say. But I learned that his version of pride meant silence, approval only when I didn't challenge him, affection only when I stayed unseen. It was easier for him to honor his memories than to recognize my reality. At the next briefing, halfway through reviewing an operations list, a name on the advisor panel stopped me cold. Commander Ray Dalton. I blinked. Once, twice, to be sure. The same man who had stood in my father's yard, the only one who hadn't laughed. He was one of the technical consultants assigned to Operation Silent Rain, the mission that had nearly broken us all. My throat tightened as I remembered the comms channel a year earlier. His voice reporting enemy proximity, my voice issuing extraction orders through static. He had heard me then, not as anyone's daughter, but as his commanding officer. And when he saw me that night in Charleston, he'd known exactly who I was. He had stayed silent, not out of fear, but respect. And maybe, I thought, to protect me from the man who never would have understood the truth. The operation's name had always sounded like a threat. Silent Rain. Even saying it felt like pressing your tongue to ice. 3 days without sleep. 62 civilians trapped between crossfire on an island no map admitted existed. We coordinated in shifts, rotations blurring, adrenaline replacing food or rest. I was the last voice before extraction, and the first voice when it failed. Move west, redirect Bravo team, keep the evac corridor clear. Every second was a negotiation between chaos and control. When the final message came through, all civilians secured, I didn't celebrate. I just exhaled, slow, steady, letting the pen slip from my hand. The relief didn't feel like victory. It felt like permission to breathe again. General Morgan Hale appeared behind me, silent until the tension broke. His hand rested briefly on my shoulder. "You've done what most men couldn't," he said. I nodded once, not out of modesty, but necessity. Praise was as classified as failure here. Success lived behind locked doors. That night, I returned to my apartment in D.C., a quiet space with more security than warmth. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. I opened my laptop to check for mission logs. There it was. An email from my father, a photo of him in his old Navy uniform, medals gleaming beneath the caption, "Still miss the days of real war." It should have meant nothing, but it carved through me like shrapnel. His version of war was the only one that counted. Mine, conducted behind screens in silence, would never be enough. My finger hovered over the delete key. Then the screen blinked red. Security alert. Unauthorized civilian access detected. Charleston. SC. My pulse stilled. I traced the digital trail. Every command automatic. My training taking over. The account ID appeared in black on white. D. Pierce. My father. He was inside a restricted system, my system, digging where he didn't belong. I stared at the screen, unable to decide which cut deeper, that he'd broken a federal law, or that he hadn't believed me enough to ask first. The man who had taught me about honor and duty was now breaching the one code I'd built my life around. Maybe he was curious. Maybe he didn't believe a daughter could carry a title he respected. But his intrusion risked everything: my clearance, my command, the integrity of the mission that had saved lives. I glanced at my wrist. The Unit 77 tattoo peeked from beneath my sleeve, black and sharp as ever. It had always been my reminder of who I was, the side of me no one at home could name. The ink seemed to pulse under the blue light of the screen. "All right," I whispered. "If he wants to see the truth, then he will." And for the first time in my life, I wasn't speaking like a soldier. I was speaking like a daughter who was finally done being invisible. 2 weeks after the security alert, my father called. His voice was sharp, commanding, leaving no room for refusal. "This weekend, Charleston's hosting the Veterans Gala. You're coming with me. A Navy man's daughter should know how to show up." I almost said no, but curiosity, or maybe defiance, made me agree. Part of me needed to see how far he would go this time to make me small. The Grand Colonial was drenched in gold light that night, the chandeliers glinting off medals and champagne glasses. Old soldiers in pressed uniforms swapped stories about wars that had long turned to myth. Their wives sparkled beside them, polished and patient. My father stood at the center of it all, grinning, his voice filling the room as easily as it once filled the deck of a destroyer. When the host began praising families who carried on the spirit of service, my father placed a heavy hand on my shoulder. "My daughter works at the Department of Defense," he announced proudly. "Best secretary they've got. Probably types faster than she could ever shoot." Laughter erupted. I felt it cut through me, familiar as a scar. He didn't even notice. He basked in their amusement, mistaking mockery for charm. I smiled, a small, polite curve of my lips that tasted like ash. Across the room, Commander Ray Dalton stood near the bar, arms folded, eyes steady. He wasn't laughing. When I turned, he crossed the floor quietly. His voice, when it came, was low enough that only I heard it. "Don't let him make you invisible again. Colonel." You remembered my rank. Hard to forget the voice that saved 62 lives. The words hit harder than the laughter. He'd been there, on the comms during Silent Rain. I'd given the orders that kept his unit alive. He'd heard my voice, trusted it. And now he was standing here, watching me pretend to be something smaller for the sake of a man who couldn't see beyond his own reflection. "If he ever learns the truth," Ray said softly, "let it be from you. Not from gossip." I looked across the room. My father was raising his glass. Deep in another story, louder this time. "Real war doesn't happen behind keyboards," he declared. "It's where men bleed and fight." The laughter returned, swelling like static. I stood, calm and deliberate, and walked away. Not because I was angry, but because staying felt like agreeing. Later, in the quiet of my hotel room, I set my phone on the table. The screen glowed red. "Unauthorized access attempt resumed. Source, D. Pierce." He was still trying, still breaking rules to see a truth he'd never earned. For the first time, I realized I hadn't just lost his respect. I'd lost the illusion that I ever needed it. I caught the first flight back to DC. The next morning, the sky was the color of steel, and the air inside the base carried that sterile calm that always preceded a storm. By the time I reached the command center, the official report was waiting on my desk. Multiple unauthorized login attempts, restricted database, Operation Silent Rain. IP origin, Charleston, SC. There was no room left for doubt. The man who'd raised me on discipline and duty had just violated both. General Morgan Hale sat across from me, reading in silence. When he finally looked up, his expression was unreadable. "If this is accurate," he said slowly, "it's a federal offense." I kept my voice steady. "I know." He leaned back in his chair, studying me like I was a classified file of my own. "What are you going to do? Not report him. But he'll learn what disrespect costs." Instead of pressing charges, I opened a new document. The title field read, "Request for Partial Declassification, Operation Silent Rain." If he wanted to see what I did, I would let him, on my terms, not through the keyhole of his suspicion. I would give him the truth, wrapped in the one thing he valued most. Ceremony? When Hale saw the form appear in the system, he frowned. "Once this is made public, there's no reversing it. That mission's under lock for a reason." I met his gaze. "Truth deserves discipline too. General, I've been silent long enough." He didn't argue. He just nodded. A quiet salute from one soldier who understood another. By dusk, I opened the guest list for the upcoming Strategic Command Recognition Ceremony in Norfolk. The cursor blinked beside two empty fields. Captain Douglas Pierce, Ret. Commander Ray Dalton, Ret. As I typed the last name, something inside me steadied. My reflection on the dark screen looked calm. Colder, maybe. But sure, this wasn't about vengeance. It was about balance. About letting a man who measured worth in volume learn the strength of silence. When I closed the laptop, I caught a faint reflection of myself in the glass, ribbons folded neatly beside a medal I'd never worn. For the first time, I didn't see the daughter who needed approval. I saw a commander preparing for battle again. Only this time, the battlefield was family. The next move was mine. 3 days later, I sent 2 invitations. Captain Douglas Pierce, Ret. Commander Ray Dalton, Ret. The destination was printed in Navy ink. Strategic Command Recognition Ceremony, Norfolk Naval Command. Theme: Leadership Under Pressure. I knew my father wouldn't refuse. He'd never missed a chance to see himself reflected in another man's salute. That night, he called. Voice carrying the same self-assured pride that had built and broken our home. "Rowan, are you organizing this ceremony, or did they invite me as a guest of honor?" "Both," I said. "Good. It's about time they honor the men who actually fought." I paused, just long enough to let the words hang. "I think so too." After the call, I looked down at the event schedule glowing on my screen. My name was there, printed at the bottom, no longer under administrative staff. Colonel Rowan Pierce, honored recipient. 2 days later, I met General Morgan Hale at the Washington base. He slid a folder toward me. "I've approved the partial declassification of Operation Silent Rain." Then he looked up. Steady. "Are you sure you want him there?" I held his gaze. "I don't want to explain myself. I just want him to see me clearly." He leaned back, studying my face. "The truth won't just hit him. It'll hit you too." Silence protected me long enough. I said, "Now it's time for it to testify." In the corridor afterward, Ray Dalton was waiting. I heard Hale plans to read the entire debrief. He said quietly, "If he mentions casualty numbers, you'll face a review for overexposure. If he says it, I'll take it." I answered, "Silence that lasts forever becomes a lie." Ray's eyes softened with something between warning and respect. "Sometimes the truth kills too." "Pierce." "Then I'll let it. At least it'll die honest." That night, before leaving See, I packed my dress uniform. The white fabric gleamed under lamplight, folded inside a black velvet case. On the table sat a medal I'd never worn, its cold metal catching the faint reflection of the life I'd kept hidden. An internal memo pinged across my screen. Subject: Family connection verified. Note: Civilian Douglas Pierce now cleared as guest under Veterans Honor. A faint smile tugged at me. He'd finally been granted access to a world that had already outgrown him. The hotel by the Norfolk harbor glowed in muted gold. Warships floated in the dark distance, their hulls glistening like silent witnesses. I sat on the balcony, watching the water rise and fall to the rhythm of a ticking clock. Behind me, the door opened. My father's voice broke the quiet, rough and proud as ever. "I knew you'd be here." He stepped out with a bottle of bourbon, walking like a man still balancing on the deck of a destroyer. "Your mother says you're wearing that uniform tomorrow. You serious about that?" "I never joke about what I've earned. You think a few secret medals make you a soldier? Men like me have seen blood, not spreadsheets." I didn't answer. The night air turned heavier. "If you really serve," he said louder, "prove it. Stop hiding behind screens." I stood, unlatched the suitcase, and lifted the lid. Light spilled across the room, washing over the immaculate white uniform, crisp and precise, the ribbons shining under the lamp. Silence fell. He stared at it as though it was a mirror showing him something he'd refused to see. "How long have you had that? Since the day I became someone you didn't believe could exist." His shoulders lowered, but his pride fought to stay upright. "Then tomorrow, wear it. If you think you deserve it." I met his eyes. "I don't need your permission, but I'll wear it so you'll understand the difference between rank and noise." He left without another word, and for the first time, I didn't feel anger, just certainty. A message flashed on my phone. "Pierce, rumor says Hale will read everything, including your father's old command log. If he does, your father's name will look bad." I read it, then deleted it. Tomorrow wasn't just my reckoning. It was his. I wrote a short note, folded it, and tucked it into my uniform pocket. Tomorrow, I'm not speaking to be heard. I'm showing up to be seen. The waves outside grew louder as dawn neared. The horizon began to pale, a soft gray breaking through the dark. Tomorrow, I thought, the light will come, whether anyone's ready for it or not. Norfolk Naval Command. The morning sky was so clear it looked like glass, unbroken by a single cloud. The air was still, the kind of quiet that feels like it's waiting for something to begin. The base thrummed with movement, officers in dress whites, veterans in pressed jackets heavy with medals, and reporters with cameras already raised. The main hall gleamed under the lights, every brass emblem and flag polished to perfection. The hum of voices filled the air like static, the rhythm of hundreds of people gathered for a ceremony they didn't yet understand. As I stood just outside the hall, I thought of all the briefings I'd led in windowless rooms, where silence was discipline and darkness meant safety. The difference today was the light. It wasn't behind me anymore. It was aimed directly at me. Inside, the audience rose as General Morgan Hale took the podium. I lingered at the back, hands steady at my sides. From here, I could see everything, rows of polished uniforms, reporters poised with pens, and in the front row, my father, Captain Douglas Pierce, Reed, sitting tall, his expression composed but restless. Beside him, my mother sat with her hands clasped tightly in her lap, eyes soft and unreadable. Ray Dalton was in the last row, posture perfect, gaze locked on the stage. I stepped into the hall as the music faded, the rhythm of my shoes clicking softly against the marble. I wore full dress whites, the ribbons and insignia arranged with surgical precision. The weight of the fabric felt familiar, grounding. A few heads turned as I walked past. Some assumed I was an aide. Others barely noticed me at all. Then Hale began to speak, his voice calm and measured, each word deliberate. Today we honor those who lead not only with command, but with composure, the leaders who stand unshaken when the world around them trembles. The murmuring grew quieter. I stood at the back of the room, spine straight, eyes fixed on the stage. Hale reached for the folder before him, the one sealed with a red department insignia. The snap of the clasp echoed through the silence. Operation Silent Rain. He read, "A classified mission conducted under extreme conditions. 62 civilians rescued within 8 hours. Commanding Officer, Colonel Rowan Pierce, Unit 77. The room fell utterly still. Chairs creaked, heads turned. The reporters froze, unsure if they'd misheard. From the front row, my father's hand tightened on his knee. I stepped forward, my pace even, deliberate. The click of my heels echoed against the marble floor, steady and unhurried, each step sounding like the beat of a ceremonial drum. My father half rose from his chair, his mouth parted slightly, confusion and disbelief colliding in the same breath. "Colonel?" Before anyone could respond, Ray Dalton stood. His movements were clean, disciplined, a salute carried out with quiet reverence. For a moment, it was just him and me in the sea of silence. Then one officer behind him stood, then another. Within seconds, an entire section of the hall was on its feet, rows of uniforms rising like a wave. The applause began low, almost hesitant. Before it gathered strength, it rolled across the room, a sound like thunder breaking over the ocean. Hale waited for the noise to soften, then looked directly toward my father. His tone dropped, deliberate and heavy. This rank was not earned behind a desk. It was forged in the smoke of battle, in the space between life and death. Under her command, the men who once served under you, Captain Pierce, lived to return home. Every head turned toward my father. The color drained slightly from his face. His fingers gripped the armrest so tightly, his knuckles whitened. My mother's hand hovered near his, unsure whether to comfort or let him face it alone. Hale's voice softened, but carried even more weight. "Today, Captain, you stand in the presence of your own legacy, one that carries your name, your discipline, but her strength. A new generation of command, quiet, steadfast, and no less honorable." The silence that followed was deeper than any applause. My father's eyes moved from Hale to me, searching for something familiar, perhaps for the daughter he thought he knew. What he found instead was someone forged in the same code he'd once lived by, only quieter, sharper, tempered by her own fire. Slowly, he stood. No one told him to. No one dared. He straightened, shoulders squared, back rigid with pride and something else. Regret. Maybe. His hand rose to his brow. The salute was perfect, practiced over decades, but the fingers trembled. I halted mid-step, facing him fully, and returned the salute with equal precision. Between us stretched a silence thicker than words. Years of misunderstanding condensed into one moment of recognition. The world around us seemed to fade. The murmurs, the lights, the cameras, all drowned beneath that stillness. Hale's final words broke the quiet like a benediction. Some lead through command, others through presence. Today, we honor the latter. The applause erupted again, louder than before. It wasn't polite this time. It was alive, roaring, unstoppable. Cameras flashed, capturing an image neither of us could have scripted. A father saluting the daughter he'd once underestimated, and a daughter standing tall in the light that no longer needed hiding. I didn't smile. I didn't need to. I only breathed, each inhale steady, each exhale releasing the weight I'd carried for years. As the ovation swelled, I looked at my father one last time. His head dipped slightly, not in defeat, but in acceptance. The great Captain Pierce was gone. What remained was something far rarer, a man learning humility in the shadow of his own lesson. For the first time, the silence between us wasn't a wound. It was understanding. After the ceremony, the hall emptied like a tide receding from shore. Voices that had filled the room minutes ago now faded into the distant clatter of metals and footsteps. Officers, veterans, reporters, all of them drifted toward the exits, their applause dissolving into polite murmurs. The air still held the faint smell of brass polish and pride. I stayed by the glass wall at the back of the room, where the sunlight flooded through in thick, golden beams. It spilled across the floor like molten metal, sharp and warm, lighting every dust particle that hung in the air. For a long time, I didn't move, The noise had ended, but the echo of it pressed against my ribs. The sound of shoes behind me broke the quiet. I didn't need to turn around. I knew that step, the measured rhythm drilled into me since childhood, the gait of a man who had never learned to slow down even when the world told him to. He stopped a few paces away. I could feel the silence between us stretch, thick and unfamiliar. There was no bourbon in his hand this time, no confident posture, no booming laugh to fill the space, just a man stripped of armor. "How long?" he said at last, voice low and rough. "How long have you been hiding this from me?" I kept my eyes on the glass, watching the sunlight crawl slowly across the polished floor. "Since the day you stopped listening." The words landed heavy, but not cruel. He didn't flinch, for once. He didn't argue. He only nodded, the kind of slow acknowledgement that carries more truth than denial ever could. His gaze dropped to the ribbons on my chest. His breath caught, a quiet sound that almost wasn't there. "They said," he began carefully, "they said you saved 19 men who used to serve under me." "Yes." He swallowed, the movement visible, fragile. "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything," I answered. "Just remember this. I don't make coffee for anyone." His lips trembled into something that wanted to be a smile, but didn't know how. The gesture was brief, unfinished, but it was more than he'd given me in years. He turned away before I could respond, shoulders heavier than I remembered. My mother appeared in the doorway a moment later. She didn't speak, didn't offer a word or a tear. She simply touched my hand, a soft, fleeting connection, and followed him out. The sound of their footsteps faded down the corridor until only the hum of the lights remained. I let the silence settle again. Familiar, but no longer suffocating. This time, it felt earned. When I finally returned to my room, the air was still. The hotel staff had cleared the breakfast trays, folded the curtains halfway. On the desk sat a single envelope, plain white, slightly creased. My name written in an uneven hand that shook with age and pride. I hesitated before opening it. Inside was a page of lined paper, the handwriting slanted and uneven, ink smudged in places, as if he'd stopped midway, unsure how to continue. "You taught me that command isn't about how loud you speak, it's about standing steady when others need to believe. I'm proud of you, Rowan. Dad." I traced the edge of the page with my thumb, feeling the indentations where his pen had pressed too hard. My throat tightened, not with grief, but with something quieter. Relief, maybe. The kind that comes when a wound finally stops bleeding. I folded the letter neatly, placed it beside the medal on the nightstand. The two looked almost identical in meaning, different symbols of the same victory. One earned in battle, the other in silence. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, looking at the folded letter in the afternoon light. There were no tears, no burst of joy, just a slow easing, like the weight of years slipping off my shoulders. It felt strange, this kind of peace, unannounced, almost shy. Outside the window, the naval harbor shimmered. The ships rocked gently, the water glinting with tiny sparks of sunlight. A breeze brushed the curtains, carrying the faint hum of drills and the distant echo of orders shouted across the docks. Life went on, as it always did. The screen of my tablet lit up. One new message. From Jend Morgan Hale. Subject: Appointment confirmation. I opened it without hesitation. The upper command has approved your recommendation. Effective immediately. You are appointed Director of the Strategic Coordination Division. I leaned back, reading it twice, maybe 3 times. The title didn't feel like triumph. It felt like punctuation, a quiet period at the end of a long sentence. I smiled, not because of the position, but because I understood something at last. Every mission I had led, every order I had given, every silence I had held, it all led here. Not to a promotion, but to this understanding. I had finally completed the hardest assignment of my life. I had taught the man who once taught me. The same man who measured respect in salutes and scars now understood it could exist in quiet acknowledgement, in a folded letter left on a desk. I picked up the letter once more, the paper warm from the light. The ink caught a shimmer as I held it up. For the first time, I noticed a faint mark at the bottom. His handwriting had trailed off mid-word, as if he'd wanted to say more, but decided he didn't need to. It was enough. I set it back down, aligning the edges carefully beside the metal. Outside, the sunlight began to soften, spreading gold over the water, stretching toward the horizon. The noise of the world returned in gentle waves. Voices in the hall, the hum of an engine starting somewhere below, the steady pulse of a life still moving forward. I stood, straightened the uniform that still bore the weight of his salute, and looked out the window one last time before leaving the room. The harbor gleamed beneath the fading light. For the first time in years, I didn't see a battlefield between us. I saw reflection, 2 generations staring back from the same horizon. Finally, at peace with the silence that had built them both. And for the first time in my life, silence didn't feel like distance. It felt like respect. A year later, the world felt quieter, the kind of quiet that didn't demand explanation. I stood on the deck of the command vessel, anchored in the Chesapeake Bay, the wind sharp and clean against my face. The horizon stretched endlessly ahead, painted in soft shades of coral and silver. The sea reflected the pale morning light like glass. Every breath tasted of salt and purpose. Below me, sailors moved in rhythmic precision, voices carried away by the breeze. Boots struck metal in steady time as salutes followed my passing. I nodded in acknowledgement, each gesture instinctive now, simple, not ceremonial. Director Pierce. The title didn't feel heavy, it felt earned. For the first time in years, I loved the silence. Not the kind I once used as armor, but the kind that followed after noise had finally run out of meaning. I slipped my hand into the pocket of my uniform and pulled out the folded letter. The edges had softened with time, the corners still stained with a faint brown ring of coffee. My father's handwriting remained the same, angled, deliberate, stubbornly neat despite the tremor that must have run through his hand when he wrote it. Command isn't volume, it's presence. I smiled. He had found the words I'd been waiting for all my life. I folded the paper again, careful not to crease the line of his signature, and tucked it back into my pocket. The first rays of the sun spread across the waves, gold spilling like a promise reborn. The water shimmered, alive and restless, yet calm beneath the surface, like the way command truly felt when you stopped trying to prove it. I looked down at my wrist. The ink that once marked Unit 77 had begun to fade. The black lines had softened into a muted gray, almost blending with my skin. It wasn't a secret anymore, or a burden. It was a relic of resilience, proof that silence, when chosen, could be power. Legacy, I murmured to the wind, isn't inherited. It's built, quietly. The sea answered with a soft slap against the hull. I leaned against the rail, watching the morning unfold. The crew was beginning their drills, voices rising faintly over the sound of the waves. Somewhere behind me, the ship's bell rang, clear and strong, cutting through the dawn. It reminded me of every mission briefing, every heartbeat spent in the shadows, every moment I'd chosen calm over chaos. I wondered what my father was doing at that very moment. Probably standing on his porch, coffee in hand, watching the same sun climb over Charleston's harbor. Maybe he'd think about that day in Norfolk, the applause, the salute, and how it had changed the language we used with each other. We never said much after that, but our silence had shifted. It no longer carried blame, it carried understanding. In the months that followed the ceremony, he'd started writing more letters, short ones, always in the same tone, simple, direct, never sentimental. He told me about his garden, the neighbors, the storms that came in off the coast. Sometimes he signed them Dad, sometimes just Douglas. Each one ended the same way. Stay steady. And I had. Every decision since that day, every strategy I approved, every soldier I mentored, it all carried a trace of him. Though not in the way he once imagined, he'd taught me command by accident, through contradiction, through the spaces between his words. I had turned that lesson into something new. The sun climbed higher, spilling warmth over the deck. The bay glittered, and the faint hum of engines filled the air. A formation of ships drifted into view, their silhouettes bold against the horizon. They were mine to guide now, not by force, not by fear, but by presence. A young officer approached, stopping a respectful distance away. "Ma'am, the coordination team is ready for your briefing." I nodded. "I'll be there in a moment." He saluted crisply and left. His footsteps faded, leaving only the whisper of waves against the hull. I stayed where I was, letting the wind press against my shoulders, the world expanding in front of me. When I finally turned toward the bridge, I caught one last glimpse of the open water. For a moment, it looked endless, boundless, like possibility itself. I whispered to no one, to the sea, to him, maybe to both. "We did it, Dad." The words dissolved into the breeze, carried far beyond what I could see. The sun climbed higher, turning the water into liquid gold. Beneath that light, the ships moved as one, steady, deliberate, silent. The kind of silence that held power, not absence. And as the waves rolled out across the bay, the sound that followed was soft and rhythmic, almost like applause, distant, eternal, and perfectly quiet.